Danse. Okay. Bonjour, everybody, and welcome to the Indigenous portion of OTI. The Pope just came to say sorry to us. I know non-Indigenous people from various backgrounds wanted to talk to me about it. They wanted to know what the Indigenous communities thought. I want to thank all of you for giving Indigenous people space and time to digest everything. Not one person was rude to me or told me what to do or how I should behave. People just listened. Listening. Allies told me stories of how they watched the Pope in Maskwacis give his address on TV and what their own families' reactions were from the various different generations, and how they, the Allies, told their families it was not about them. It is about Indigenous people and how we were so very wronged. They informed me that a light bulb went off in their loved ones' heads. In the end, this is my interpretation of the events that transpired in Alberta on Treaty 6 this past summer. The Pope role modeled. Whether you agree with me or not, he role modeled for change. The change Canada needs, and the denial we need to get out from. The validation Indigenous peoples need, and the actions next taken from all sources and all subject matter. Whether it be decolonizing your practice, indigenizing your curriculum, or whether it be role modeling, reflecting on your own journey, or by being an upstander, not a passive bystander. Without you role modeling these things, whether you understand it or not, because I am sure the Pope is no expert either on this. The students who rely on you for information and expertise will follow your lead. I'm going to cut to the chase and give you the answer to my 3 sessions over the next 3 days here at OTI. The call to action for you is to role model change. Today, I'm going to give you the tools you need through lecturing, questions on Mentimeter, and video clips. I am using a multi-modality approach because I am role modeling to you what visual and experiential learners like to experience in their classes. Indigenous peoples are mostly in this type of learning category. I know I am. I am also informal in my speech and approach because Indigenous people are more egalitarian and non-hierarchical when learning something. So now I will begin. Danse. Okay. Tawau. Welcome to A Call to Action, Centering Indigenous Methodologies and Approaches, Part 1 of a 3-part session of this year's Online Teaching Institute. I am so happy to be here, and I hope your summers are all going well. I'm excited to be heading into the fall with you all. My name is Andrea Menard, and I am the lead educational developer of Indigenizing Pedagogies and Curricula at the Center for Teaching and Learning. I am also cross-appointed with the Vice Provost's Office of Indigenous Research and Programming, and I am based at the Augustana campus. I am a white passing Métis person and an intergenerational residential day Roman Catholic school survivor. This is my family pictured here. My great-grandmother is one of the little twin girls you'll see second and third from the left. We are originally from the abolished Red River settlement in North Dakota and Manitoba. We straddled that medicine line between the US and Canada. Some of my ancestors are buried at Batoche because they fought against the federal troops for Métis self-government rights and lost. Some were arrested and the rest were left as the road allowance people. We were disenfranchised people, not allowed to live on reserve or in the townships. We were left to the road allowances because legally that was no man's land. We basically squatted everywhere and did everything illegally for food. And some of us didn't even go to residential school because of this, which is a blessing in disguise. We were pushed off and our shacks were burned when Canada decided to create the highways for prosperity and progress. We had nowhere left to live. Being white passing was also a blessing for some of us who could pass. So a lot of my Métis side is very ashamed of their Métis roots. We have many stories about being oppressed and trying to pass as white. Because basically we get kicked out of the towns if they found out we were Indigenous. These sessions are about how to localize Indigenous knowledge and why it is important to do so. I called the 3 sessions a call to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action, a document I heavily rely on in order to change things for the better. I outlined in my synopsis that there were 19 calls to action for the university to take part in, but really all the calls to action are relative. This is a medicine wheel. The medicine wheel is an organizing principle and is a concept that helps to impart foundational Indigenous knowledges on learners and lets me introduce them to the beginning of Indigenous ethics and ways of looking at the world in this visual way. Not only is this concept within a circle and not linear, it consists of 4 equal parts, with each part representing the north, east, south, and westerly directions, as well as the emotional, physical, intellectual, and spiritual parts of ourselves. As you can see, the Cree people call themselves Niahu. The root word of Niahu is Neo. Neo means 4. So they see themselves as 4 parts. This is a reflection exercise we're going to do right now on your own. If you have paper and pen handy, by all means, write down your thoughts. My questions to you right now are you in balance? What part do you rely on mostly? What part less so? For teaching, I rely on. For your personal life, I rely on. And why? Take a minute. Great. Thank you. The Chief Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Murray Sinclair, I'm sure you all know him. He commented, reconciliation is not a spectator sport. So I would like everyone to practice being an upstander, not a bystander. I got this from the Alberta Health Services anti-racism pamphlet, where they were requesting that the people in health services be an upstander when they see something happening. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about reconciliation. In releasing the final findings in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada made 94 calls to action in order to redress the legacy of residential schools and advance the process of Canadian reconciliation. As I said before, 19 of these calls to action have direct implications for post-secondary settings and for those of us working within these settings. They address the education of students and the implementation of course content. Calls to action for education, education for reconciliation, health, justice, language, and culture. They also mention UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Royal Proclamation, and Covenant of Reconciliation that includes the repudiation to justify European sovereignty over Indigenous lands and peoples, such as the Doctrine of Discovery and Terra Nullius. I think in this particular space that we're in today, we can develop conversations where those of you who are participating can bring a deeper sense of knowledge and bring some of your knowledge to those discussions with me. I understand that many of you come from various backgrounds and have little to no knowledge of Indigenous peoples on this land, and some of you might have medium to advanced knowledge. I'm going to do a test on you through Mentimeter in the next couple slides here to see. I am going to start to have bi-weekly meetings called Kitchen Table Conversations. We are going to visit each other, and I have a definition of visiting on this slide. We're just going to be meeting in an informal way instead of a one-directional way that usually takes place. We're going to be using our hearts instead of our intellects or heads. And it allows each other to get to know each other through reciprocity and relationality instead of me talking to you about what needs to be done. So we are going to do bi-weekly visiting through Kitchen Table Conversations. This runs in parallel with communities of practice and care that Mandy and Dalbeer will be facilitating throughout the year. So I am just so pleased that we can work together and facilitate this type of information sharing throughout the year. So that's why I'm really excited for fall. But before we get to the Mentimeter questions, I want to do a couple more concepts with you. So from my work in this area, a lot of people ask me the things that are easily attainable. Lenape and Potawatomi educational scholar and now Associate Vice President of Indigenous Initiatives, Dr. Susan Dion from York University, in 2013 introduced what she considers the all too familiar position of the perfect stranger that many teachers take when they engage with indigenizing or decolonizing. And I've encountered this too. Susan states that this position is problematic because it's characterized by not knowing, as well as not wanting to know about indigeneity, and accordingly not being implicated in relationships with Indigenous peoples. Susan Dion suggests a few pedagogical practices that work towards disrupting this problematic position in her video on Vimeo. And we can get into this on day 2 and day 3. So when people approach me, they say, I don't know anyone Indigenous. I don't know how to get in contact with anyone Indigenous. Well, you just look online and you call the number. It's that easy. And if the Pope can do it, you can do it. So I also want to belabor this point and show you a snapshot of what it feels like when people ask me about indigenizing content, when it's pretty simple. But please bear with me. I want to show you a clip from 1986, and this is still relevant today, an Australian film called Barbecue Area. This film really strikes a chord. Okay, so Barbecue Area, it's a satirical film directed by Don Featherstone and produced by Julian Pringle on relations between Aboriginal Australians and Australians of European descent. So just put it in the Canadian context. Barbecue Area revolves around a role reversal, whereby it is Aboriginal Australians who have invaded and colonized the fictitious country of Barbecue Area, a land that has long been inhabited by white natives, the Barbecuearians. The opening scene depicts a group of Aboriginal Australians in military uniforms coming ashore in a land they have not previously been to. In this land, they discover a number of European Australians engaged in stereotypical European Australian activities. The Aboriginal Australian explorers approach the group, and the expedition's leader asks them, "What do you call this place?" And one of the Europeans replies, "This is the Barbecue Area?" After around 200 years of Aboriginal occupation in the film, the white Australians have become a minority, and Aboriginal people have assumed power, taken all of the available land and have mostly confined whites to suburban ghettos. They are expected to follow the laws and customs of the colonizers, and their lifestyle is seen through the patronizing eyes of the majority culture. It is set in a documentary fashion, where the film follows Duranga Manika as she observes how white people are disempowered through poverty, are treated unfairly by the police, often with brutality and indifference, experience arbitrary dispossession, government inaction on white issues, white tokenism, white children being taken from their families only to be taught the values of the majority culture, and white people being relocated because the government needs their home for something. White people are now often characterized by society and in the media as lazy, unintelligent, and untrustworthy. And anyone who protests about the current circumstances is labeled a troublemaker. White rituals and cultural values are derided and dismissed as violent and meaningless. The Barbecuearians' government's paternalistic policies are defended by the Minister for White Affairs. The inversion of reality in Barbecue Area highlights the unfairness of Australia's past and present Aboriginal policies and the entrenched racism in society. This subversion of normality allows viewers to see what is wrong when one group tries to control and dominate another, and questions the fairness of the current power structure in a colonized country like Australia. Now, please watch closely this 30-second clip and what the documentary star Duranga Manika asks of the people.
can you tell me about the customs of your people? How should I behave? What should I do when I go in there and see this old lady who only has up to half a dozen visitors a year?
Well, you could talk to her for a bit. Mrs. Smith, a visitor.
Would you like a sweet biscuit, dear?
Mrs. Smith lives in a small flat, surprisingly clean, not a speck of dust anywhere, and as you can see, surrounded by souvenirs.
What struck me about the film is, and it gapped a little bit, but she asked, well, what do I say to this person? And the guy says, well, you can talk to her for a bit. So a lot of people approach me and they say, well, what do I say to this elder? What do I say to this person? And what you do is you just visit them. So I just thought that was really a funny clip. And then, of course, she goes in there and is surprised that the flat is clean. And then she just patronizes on the symbolism that she has knickknacks up of her family. And anyways, as Graham stated in the chat, thanks for putting that up, Graham, that you can watch it on YouTube. It's available and it's a great watch and still relevant today. So my first question to you is, when I am teaching and there is Indigenous content, I attempt to teach it with the parameters. Great. Breakdown, good. Structural barriers, yes. And other, okay. I'm liking this. A lot of people that I've talked to avoid it. And that's okay. I'm here to talk to you about this and what strategies we can use in order not to avoid it. Because people, I know that you're used to being experts at your subject matter. But we have to think of ways and problem solve together of how we can get around this role model, indigenize, decolonize. My first answer to you would be to bring in an Indigenous guest presenter. But there are a whole bunch of barriers that we can discuss further in bringing in a guest presenter, because none of us, we need to go to our departments or faculty and ask for money. And a lot of departments and faculty do not have the money for this yet. So we're kind of locked in. And a lot of
question.
Oh, yes.
We had a question that popped in, which is really relevant. Someone has put a question. I don't know what you mean by structural barriers. So perhaps can you give an example of what a structural barrier might be?
Oh, yes. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.
Structural barriers, well, the university is a colonized system. We haven't decolonized yet. And because the university is colonized, we haven't thought about how to approach other learning systems and Indigenous knowledges, which are just as important because of the land that we're on. We're on Indigenous land, and we have not incorporated any indigenization or decolonization. Now, decolonization and indigenization, they're two different concepts. And what I like to say is decolonization comes first. So decolonization is that you attempt to understand what's going on, and then, in my thing, tear it down. That's decolonization. Tear it down. Indigenization is incorporating indigeneity into your course. Bring in an Indigenous person. Have more egalitarian opportunities in class. Look at your curriculum. How can you indigenize it? How can you make it more meaningful for Indigenous students in the class? How can you change things? So I want you to role model and change things. And I know that you don't know it, but I want you to attempt to try. So what's happening is when Indigenous people ask teachers, professors, or whoever to do something, professors usually look around. They say, well, first off, I don't have the means. I don't have the funds. I don't have this. I don't have that. It's because we've been colonized so that we don't have funds to go towards Indigenous knowledge. And the elders in Indigenous communities, they're our knowledge keepers. They're the guys with the PhDs, right? So they should be paid like a PhD person. And they're not even asked to be brought into class. So a lot of instructors come to me and they say, well, I don't have money to bring anyone in. And when you approach an Indigenous community, you always want to do reciprocity. You never want to take information from them and say, okay, thanks, bye. So reciprocity comes, of course, in tobacco. The Cree people and the Blackfoot people, they take tobacco, but it also comes in the form of honorarium and gas to be paid if they come in and teach. So yes, we're living, I would like to say we're living in structurally racist times. And we can see it by the consequences today with over-incarceration of Indigenous people in jail, with Indigenous students dropping out of high school and post-secondary. Of course, there is a resurgence happening because all of us are finally getting together and pooling together our resources and trying to come up with relevant things that Indigenous people can live with, because Indigenous people, the Western settler society, they're not doing so well with including us in. And Canada has original laws, and the original laws are Indigenous laws. And Canada just practiced the doctrine of discovery. The settlers came over and said, oh, this land is our land, thanks. And things have not been the same since that. The treaties also have to be honored. They have not been honored. I'll go into the law in day 2 and day 3, but the reason why I like the law so much is because the law states that Indigenous people are a nation here. We're our own self-governing nation, and we should be treated as such, and we are not. There are many structural barriers with many consequences. So I hope that's answered your question of the structural obstacles that are in the way with indigenizing and decolonizing. Also, there's pressure. When you want to decolonize or indigenize, usually you're left out of the social group. You're no longer welcomed in. You're isolated and ostracized because I think it's threatening for people perhaps to change. So a lot of us who do want change do suffer social consequences and also economic consequences, because a lot of us who are not tenured, we're not asked back. We're somehow let go. What I do see with the different generations is that there's a ground swelling. So the younger people, the younger professors, they're all getting together and saying, look, our systems aren't working. We want to do better. And we want this to be a better place. So they do ask, they do take risks, and they do ask. But I find that other generations are fearful of that and they don't honor that. So that's why I heavily rely on that Truth and Reconciliation calls to action for answers. I tell them the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action state that we need to change things. And how are you going to do that, leadership? Right? So I put the onus on them. And it's taken a while, but slowly the leadership is listening, slowly but surely. I mean, with the children bodies being found last year, and then with the Pope coming this summer, there is a resurgence happening with indigeneity, and I hope that it continues. Yes, it's been awful and unfortunate, and if that's the push that all of us needed to come to this point, that's the push we needed. So that's what I mean when I say there's structurally, there's obstacles in the way. For reconciliation, decolonization, and indigenization, I am a beginner, immediate, advanced, or expert. Good. So some of this is familiar to some of the people that I'm speaking to today, and thank you very much for attending, even though you probably know a lot of what I'm talking about. but yes, for the beginners and intermediates, for sure, we're going to be working on some foundational pieces. We're going to be working on the approach and ethics. And so we can all meet tomorrow. I've put this in 3 days so we can reflect overnight and come back with a refreshed mind. It takes a lot of time, and it is an uncomfortable conversation for some of us to have. But there's a lot to get through, and it is exciting work when we finally crest the wave and are all together, bringing out the best of both worlds in order to bring out a better place to be for all of us here in Canada today. Oh, what time do we meet? Oh, Daniel, we meet 11:45 each day, 11:45 to 12:30. Be here. You're welcome. And of course, this is recorded. So if you missed day 2 and day 3, please view the recordings and work on it on your own, or please contact me if you have any questions. Rule 1. So we're finishing in 6 minutes, but I want to go over Rule 1. So we mentioned in the beginning of OTI, the land. And I mentioned that the doctrine of discovery and people came over, and barbecue area, people came over and just said, oh, this land is our land now because it's not being used. Well, this land, the Indigenous people were here. And they had their own rules here, their own laws, their own customs, their own culture. And through the Indian Act, when Canada became a country, they made the Indian Act. And basically, the Indian Act said, well, they can't have any cultures, customs, laws. They're basically banned from having anything. They're going to be allotted to reserves, the First Nations are. And they basically tried to starve them out, and the Indian agents who oversaw the reserves were not very nice and held starvation over their heads in order for them not to be prosperous at farming, because initially they were some Indigenous nations were giving some farming opportunities, but Indian agents, Canada saw that they were doing well and just said, no, we're going to put the First Nations at the last of the line when farmers come up and sell their crops. The Indian agent will actually cut the price of the crop that the First Nations are selling. And we're just going to not make this profitable for First Nations. So there's a lot of things in the Indian Act that are awful. The Indian Act does need to go, but it is here for a reason, because without it, things would happen. So we are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place with the Indian Act. But again, we sign treaties. First Nations people sign treaties. We have the peace and friendship treaties, and we have the numbered treaties. The treaties are not a conquered treaty. The treaties are peace and friendship. The treaties were made to share in everything. First Nations knew, they heard that a lot of people were coming over. They're like, okay, well, let's make some accommodations. Let's share in this. And what happened was Canada decided not to honor that. So we do have treaties to back us up. The treaties are not being honored, and I would call on all of us today to start to honor the treaties. Start to really look at the doctrine of discovery and that way of thinking. The reason why the Pope is important is because the Pope was involved back in the day with the doctrine of discovery. The church backed the doctrine of discovery in order to colonize lands. So that's what's really important for the Pope coming over here in Canada today, for me at least, is he's starting to make some changes. Not only has he apologized, not only has he admitted to the genocide that happened in Canada with the residential schools, the doctrine of discovery is out there, and it's waiting to be answered for sure. So the land that we are on, I like to go local with my curriculum. So it's honorable to do so. I know sometimes it's easier to go off in Anishinaabe lands and say, look, they have these 7 incredible teachings. I want to use them. Well, you know, if you go to the Cree people, the Dene, Nakota, and ask them, they would have a similar teaching. And the Blackfoot, they would have similar teachings, but it is important that you go to where the people of the land are. And in that way, you can build relationships with them. You don't go, oh, I took 7 teachings from over in Ontario. I'm going to use them in my class. Things are good. That's a pan-Indigenous way. I would like us for the next rest of the year to try and localize, build relationships, understand the land that we're on, and invite Indigenous peoples into your class. So with 2 minutes remaining,
Some questions, Andrea, if you want to answer them.
Yes.
Okay, the first question, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
How do we teach better with our bodies included, the 4 elements, so that Indigenous and non-Indigenous students learn in a good way?
Nice. Yeah, so that's a good question because it already sounds to me like you want a role model. You want a role model to the class. The students are looking at you well, maybe they're not because they're all on their computers now, but they're looking at you and you are the knowledge keeper to them. So, Indigenous people can see right through you. So they'll see if someone is wise or not. So if you're coming across as unwise, they will see that physically. So perhaps the rest of us, we can also see it subconsciously. So be aware of how you are presenting yourself. Be aware of your knowledge. Be aware of who is in the class. Be aware of your hierarchy and the power imbalance, and try and create an equality. I really like getting to know the class. I really like asking who the class is and allowing everybody to have equal say in class. I think physically creating that type of space allows for indigeneity to come through when you are treating the students as equals, even though you do hold some of the knowledges that they want to learn from. Of course, we all use our intellects, especially at university, way more than our emotions and our hearts, as John was talking about earlier, and our spirituality. Now, that's a really interesting concept that I won't really get into too far because people think spirituality is religion, but not so much in the Indigenous world. But we're all connected as one, and it's all fluid all the time. And Indigenous peoples are high context learners. We're not low context learners. If you want to look up high context learning tonight, give it a shot. So we can get the drift subtly of things. That's high context learning. Low context learning is I will give you 3 answers and then you must act on them. High context learning is I'm going to tell you a story and you are going to get out of the story what you want because you're an autonomous individual. So I want to say that being raised in a 2 worlds as Métis and white, I know that those 2 worlds are completely opposite. So whatever the opposite of what you're doing in the Western world, think of it as completely opposite and do that for indigeneity and decolonization. And we can get into that in the next couple of days or during our kitchen table conversations. But thank you very much for the question. I hope it helps. Thank you, and I will see you all tomorrow. Megwich Marcy, hi hi.